In 2011, DC Comics launched the New 52, rebooting all the comics of the company and the continuity of the DC Universe. Every comic book series was relaunched with #1 issues across the board, and the history of every character was reimagined for a new generation. The Batman comics also went through a dramatic overhaul, with major changes and new creative teams in every single title, starting with the best of... Out of all the Batman comics of the New 52, there is one saga that overshadows everything else. One run that showcases everything that was right about this era. Of course, I'm talking about the Batman run by Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo, the main creative team that spearheaded the Batman reboot of the New 52. For 5 years, Snyder and Capullo shaped the new Batman title, reimagining iconic chapters with a modern vision, while still honoring the legacy of what came before. This was an exciting run that revitalized the Batman mythos, with unforgettable moments and over-the-top storytelling. It's a fantastic run that is also far from perfect, and it might even get me in trouble for sharing my honest opinion about it. But that has never stopped me before, and it's not going to stop me now from talking about the last great Batman run. It all begins with Batman #1, the first issue of the new Batman series, which introduced some of the most significant changes made by the New 52. The whole idea behind this project was to make the DC universe younger, because apparently the DCU was just too old, and that's how we get younger versions of Commissioner Gordon and Bruce Wayne, which would be fine, except for the fact that all of the Robins also exist already, which makes for a bit of a strange timeline. But more on that later. This opening chapter was also the introduction of the new creative team, with Scott Snyder taking over this new Batman title after writing the final story of Dick Grayson's era as Batman. The Black Mirror had been a huge success in Detective Comics, and Scott Snyder became the natural choice to take over Batman in this new era. Snyder brought with him the style that made the Black Mirror so great, leaning heavily on the darker, more sinister side of Gotham, and introducing the iconic new enemies called the Court of Owls. The first storyline of this run was named after this ancient secret society that has existed in Gotham for centuries and who have been working behind the scenes to take over the city. Batman always thought they were just a myth, a legend to scare kids, and it is only after one of their elite assassins tries to kill Bruce Wayne that Batman finally realizes that the Court of Owls is very real and very dangerous. On his mission to stop the Court of Owls, Batman goes from the top of the highest buildings all the way down to the underbelly of Gotham City, showing in a very clever way the extent of the Court's power over Gotham. This is how Batman goes up against the Court of Owls and fights their deadly assassin called Talon. And it is here that the storyline becomes a full-blown horror nightmare, as the Court of Owls keeps Batman prisoner in their giant underground maze, drugging him with chemicals that make him see bizarre and monstrous visions, while forcing him to fight the Talon and find his way out of the maze. Now, this moment right here is the perfect example of the style that Scott Snyder went for in this entire run. These gigantic set pieces of pure darkness and nightmare-fueled horrors had never truly been seen before in the Batman comics until the Court of Owls, and going forward in this run, this becomes the trademark style in every big storyline, combining these epic scenarios with classic Batman elements like murder mysteries, detective work, and superhero action. However, none of these big moments would have worked nearly as well as they did if it wasn't for the art of Greg Capullo, who was essential to make this run as successful as it turned out to be. Back in 2011, Greg Capullo was a breath of fresh air for Batman, because for the best part of the previous decade, the Batman comics had lost their visual identity. In almost all of the 2000s, there was nothing interesting visually going on. Gotham was, for the most part, a bright and realistic city, while Batman was the perfect modern vigilante, with the state-of-the-art gadgets and vehicles that were all grounded in reality. That approach definitely worked in a couple of stories, but after a while there was a lack of cool darkness that the Batman comics needed, and that's why Greg Capullo became such a groundbreaking success, as he finally brought back the visual identity of the Batman comics. Gotham City was once again the heart and soul of these stories, showcasing an unnaturally dark city with towering buildings, dark alleys, and ominous landscapes. This feels like a city where danger could be lurking in the shadows, where evil awaits in every corner, a dark city of nightmares where monsters can become real. Batman also looked better than ever, once again becoming this mythical figure, a brutal avenger and a silent detective, moving in the shadows and ready to strike. The Batman comics finally looked awesome and scary, as they should. Greg Capullo completely understood the assignment, and his work complemented the scripts of Scott Snyder so well that it became instantly obvious that they would go on to become one of the best creative teams in the history of Batman. Now, as much praise as I have given this initial storyline, I do have to say it is not without flaws. The first half of the Court of Owls is indeed great, but it's the second half where trouble begins. After coming out of the underground layer of the court, Batman then finds a connection between the Talons and Dick Grayson. As it turns out, the court had planned to turn Nightwing into one of their deadly assassins, and in order to do it, they had placed a microchip in one of Nightwing's teeth. And so Dentist Batman goes into action to pull out Nightwing's wisdom tooth with a huge backhand sucker punch, and no anesthesia required. This is one of those things that shouldn't really work, but they do because he's Batman. Still, I don't like the unnecessary violence against his own family. It's just weird and poorly done. But there's no time to dwell on Batman's methods right now, because the Court of Owls then launches a massive attack, releasing hundreds of Talons all over Gotham to kill the important people and the authorities of the city. The whole Batman family gets their own chapters to fight the Talons in their own series, while Batman is busy fighting off the invasion at Wayne Manor. The Talons attack Bruce and Alfred and force them to retreat into the Batcave, where they fight back using everything they have, including a massive bat armor that comes out of nowhere, and it's perfect for a new line of Batman action figures. The bat armor, however, is destroyed in less than one chapter, and this anticlimactic problem with bat armors will become an issue a couple more times in this run. Eventually, Batman manages to stop the Talons, and then he goes after the Court of Owls, only to find they have all been killed by this new character, who was introduced in Chapter 1, called Lincoln March. The final fight then happens between Batman and this crazy Talon, who claims to be Bruce's younger brother, and who has enough evidence to make a convincing argument. In the end, Batman wins the fight, and March apparently dies in a big explosion, which is a rather poor ending for an otherwise great storyline. And it doesn't work because the whole revelation about Bruce's brother doesn't make sense at all. It's just another way of creating shocking moments using the Wayne family, like it happened with Dr. Simon Hurt. However, this time it is left ambiguous on purpose, leaving it up to the readers to make up any conclusions about the truth behind Bruce's younger brother, and that just shows a serious lack of commitment. And the only other thing that bugged me was how the story makes Bruce look rather naive and ignorant about the history of Gotham. It always bothered me that Bruce wouldn't know or be aware of the existence of such a large organization working right under his nose, using his money and spread all over the city. But then I remembered that this was the first Batman storyline Scott Snyder wrote immediately after the Black Mirror. So what if the Court of Owls was meant to be a Bat Grayson storyline? If that was the case, this would have been much better, because Dick is not all that familiar with the ancient Gotham history, as we already saw in Gates of Gotham. The whole angle of Dick Grayson being chosen to become a Talon would have also worked better with Dick as Batman. And all of this makes me think that maybe that was the original plan, but because the New 52 happened, things had to be changed. In any case, the Court of Owls was the first storyline of this run, and for many people, the best. For me, it's not. I actually think it's quite overrated, especially considering what happens next. At the start of the New 52, something big happened with the Joker, when in the very first chapter of Detective Comics, he gets his face completely cut off by this new villain called the Dollmaker. But the most curious part about it is that for a whole year after that, nobody did anything with the Joker, until Scott Snyder. Following the Court of Owls, the Joker finally came back, but in this new story, he became an actual horror monster. The fact that he didn't have a face was already horrific enough, but now he steals back his mutilated face from the GCPD and becomes a literal boogeyman, wearing the face as a grotesque mask. This image of the Joker was straight out of a nightmare, and it was perfect because this is a horror story where things get progressively darker and stranger. At first, the story looks like a normal horror story, with a monster lurking in the shadows and many quiet and eerie moments, like Bruce coming back to Wayne Manor and searching for Alfred in the vast emptiness and silence of the massive place. It's a great sequence, very ominous, full of suspense and atmosphere. But things only get exponentially weirder from then, as Batman then goes straight into Arkham Asylum, where he walks down the corridors of madness and witnesses how the world turns into a surreal hell, with burning horses running wild and madmen wearing full police gear and flaming swords. This dark fever dream was all part of Joker's plan, where he forces Batman to ride a horse as a true knight and face his most iconic enemies, like Mr. Freeze and the Scarecrow, before reaching the Joker, who is waiting alongside Penguin, Two-Face and Riddler in a sort of throne room specially designed for Batman. Now in this moment, there's a detail that I really like, as we can see the Joker's face slowly rotting and decomposing. In the first chapters of the story, the face was still white and bleached, as it had been preserved frozen in the GCPD. But now that some time has passed, the face is slowly turning green and brown and getting swarmed by flies. It's so good that you can almost smell it, and that's an excellent attention to detail that I truly appreciate. And so we get to the final chapter of the story, where the Joker has managed to capture the entire Batman family. This was the whole point of the story, and the reason it was called A Death of the Family. It was not only a reference to the classic 1980s story A Death in the Family, but it also had a point to make. And it's the fact that Joker believes that the Bat family makes Batman weak. The Joker is sick of how dependent Batman has become of them all, and so now he becomes a Batman family hater. And you know what? He's absolutely right. In this story, Joker proves how easy it is to bring Batman down, only by targeting and attacking his friends and allies. They are literally his only weakness, and the more members there are, the worse it gets for Batman. This is how the Joker came up with the ultimate plan to turn Batman into a killer, whether by killing the family or by killing the Joker. It's a win-win scenario for the Madman, but as always, Batman somehow finds a third option and manages to stop the Joker. That, however, doesn't mean the story gets a happy ending. After all is said and done, the Batman family leaves Bruce alone, because he didn't trust them enough to tell them Joker might actually know their secret identities, which created this whole problem in the first place. The Joker was also not captured in the end, and instead he was lost deep underground in a massive cave. But to make things worse, Batman confesses to Alfred that the reason he doesn't kill the Joker is because he is afraid that if he does, someone even worse might show up next, which has to be the worst explanation. As much as I love this one as a horror story, it really does have an underwhelming ending. Not only that, but the whole relationship between Batman and Joker is very weird, with Joker acting as if he was truly in love with Batman, talking to him as if he was a lover. It's a weird characterization, with Joker sometimes being the perfect horror monster, and other times being like an obsessive stalker in a cable guy getup, which was not funny for Jim Carrey and it's not funny for Joker. But perhaps my biggest issue with this story are the many iconic villains that become simple thugs that Batman has to get through to get to the Joker. They all become background characters that have zero impact on the story, and that has to be the most frustrating thing not just about this story, but about this whole run, which is exactly why I absolutely adore the short story from issues number 19 and 20. This one feels like a classic Batman comic in the sense that it's short and simple but quite effective. The story features a new and more powerful version of Clayface, forcing Batman to use a special new Batsuit specifically designed to fight him, in an action-packed story that even makes room for a small Easter egg to the Batman Beyond Batsuit. All of that is good enough already, but the absolute best part about this short story is the framing. Because you see, this story was published shortly after the death of Damian, which happened in the Batman Incorporated series written by Grant Morrison. And I remember reading that moment and feeling nothing. The death of Damian should have been something big and important, but instead it felt shallow and pointless. That series never made me care about Damian, and his death always felt to me like a cheap gimmick. But then I read this chapter of the main Batman run, and my heart ached. Because the story opens with Bruce in the Batcave, rewatching and replaying the last video recording he has of Damian on their final mission together as Batman and Robin. Alfred thinks Bruce is just torturing himself, and he tries to tell him that it's time to let go, but Bruce wouldn't listen. By the end of the story, we go back to the Batcave once again, where Bruce tells Alfred that all he wants is to keep the memory of his son alive a little longer. So they both start watching the video together, and as they watch and listen to Damian, the tears start falling down Bruce's face in one of the most painfully sad moments ever printed in a Batman comic. You can tell a comic writer did things right when he makes you care about death, which in comics is completely meaningless. This was the first time I actually felt sad about Damian's death, and it's all thanks to Scott Snyder. And I think it's because he is a family man, and only someone like him can understand the pain of what it would mean to lose a son, a pain that is perfectly captured in this moment. This is, without a question, my favorite short story of this entire run. And I say short story, because when it comes to long stories, there is only one undisputed king, and it's not even close. In the New 52, all the characters of the DC universe needed to get brand new origin stories, and for Batman that was called 0 Year, the most ambitious and longest storyline of this run. 0 Year is so long that it was divided into 3 parts, with the first part called Secret City, following a very young and immature Bruce who has recently returned to Gotham. The first 4 chapters are quite the slow burn, as the story first has to introduce all the major characters and ideas, which takes a bit of time. The young Bruce has a really hard time finding a way to make his mission work, as he keeps rejecting everything about Bruce Wayne, including his name and his fortune, while trying to come up with a new way to fight crime. At the same time, there's a large criminal organization called the Red Hood Gang that has been terrorizing Gotham, introducing like this a new Joker origin story. And finally, we are introduced to a very young Edward Nygma as a brilliant man working at Wayne Enterprises, who is actually manipulating the Red Hood Gang behind the scenes for an even greater and sinister plan. And all of this marks the major difference between 0 Year and the classic origin story from Batman Year One. Back in the 1980s, the origin of Batman was very grounded and realistic, with Batman fighting a corrupt system that included gangsters, police officers and politicians, all the way down to pimps, hookers, drug dealers and thieves. No criminal was safe from Batman in 1986. In this new origin, however, Bruce mostly fights supervillains, which makes 0 Year feel quite different, less realistic, and yet, despite the differences, there are moments in 0 Year that were absolutely taken from Year One. The moment when Bruce gets the inspiration to become Batman is an essential part of the origin story, since Bill Finger came up with it all the way back in 1939. In 1986, Frank Miller reimagined that moment, making it grounded and realistic, and now, in 0 Year, Scott Snyder made a modern adaptation of that same moment. In this new story, Bruce is attacked by the Red Hood Gang and he's left to die in his burning apartment. Somehow, Bruce manages to survive and crawls his way back to Wayne Manor, where Alfred takes care of him. Bruce then takes some time to recover in the Manor's study, where he activates a holographic image of the caves underneath the Manor, and a swarm of holographic bats come to him, revealing to him his ultimate fate. This is almost a perfect mirror of how things happen in Year One, and although I do like the Year One version better, I will say that this new version is kind of a great combination of this moment from Year One and the first Batman origin. In fact, one of the things I love about 0 Year is how well it manages to incorporate and combine things from both Year One and Batman's actual first year in 1939. A prime example of that happens in Chapter 4, when Bruce finally starts working as Batman, wearing a modern version of the very first Golden Age Batsuit, and making his debut with a perfect homage to the first Batman cover appearance in Detective Comics number 27. This is also the turning point of the story, where everything starts to pick up momentum, and it's the start of the second part of Zero Year called Dark City. We are now way past all introductions, and from here on out, it only gets better. It's fascinating watching Bruce and Alfred figuring out the whole crime-fighting thing, working in an early, primitive version of the Batcave and slowly building up the reputation of Batman as a dark avenger of the night. Together, Bruce and Alfred set up a trap for the Red Hood gang at the Ace Chemical building, where Batman finally puts an end to their reign of terror, while also starting a whole new chapter in Gotham's crime history. This epic showdown is a fantastic way to start the new chapter, and Dark City is the perfect title, as the Riddler then creates a city-wide blackout, turning Gotham into a literal dark city. The GCPD then goes after Batman, and this gives us one of the best moments, as Batman uses a prototype Batmobile to escape, driving the car through the rooftops of the Gotham tunnels. This is yet another great throwback to the second car that Batman used in 1939, using a similar design for the new Batmobile and giving us one of the most colorful moments of the story. But that was not the only throwback to 1939, as this new chapter also brings back Dr. Death, the first ever villain in the Batman comics, only this time he is reimagined as a terrifying monster from nightmares. Now, on top of fighting the GCPD, Batman also has to fight this monster that has been killing people and turning them into grotesque trees. Thankfully, Batman soon gets James Gordon on his side, and it all happens in a moment where Gordon takes off his glasses to avoid looking at the man behind the cowl. This is yet another reference to Year 1, where Gordon lost his glasses and couldn't see the face of the man who saved his son. But the best thing about this moment is that it works as a great lesson in humanity for Bruce. Up until this moment, Bruce had an irrational hate towards the GCPD, but then Gordon tells him how he has always tried to do right, against all odds. And that's the great thing about James Gordon, because this character represents that little glimmer of hope that even in the most corrupt and rotten system, there is always at least one person who is good and decent. In fact, it's only thanks to Gordon that Batman survives the attack from the GCPD, and then he goes after Dr. Death, who keeps growing and mutating to the point of becoming a full-blown monster. It is here that Batman learns that Dr. Death has also been manipulated by the Riddler to achieve his evil master plan. The final battle with Dr. Death happens in a massive blimp above Gotham, which is also another reference that connects to that one story from 1939, where a megalomaniac used a dirigible to destroy Gotham. Now in Zero Year, that megalomaniac is the Riddler, who wants to completely destroy Gotham by blowing up the safety walls around the city. The Riddler's plan was so big and complex that Batman couldn't figure it out on time, and the Riddler gets away with it, destroying the only safety measure against rising sea levels, exactly during the worst storm Gotham has ever seen. This natural disaster is made 100 times worse thanks to the Riddler, and this marks the beginning of the third and final chapter of Zero Year. It is called Savage City, and it happens 6 months later, when Bruce finally comes out of a coma and realizes that Gotham has become a post-apocalyptic jungle. Nature has taken over the place, and the city has been sealed off from the rest of the country by the new king of Gotham, the Riddler, who somehow has managed to keep the city isolated under his tyrannical rule. It's crazy how Batman in the New 52 was literally speedrunning his way through his entire history, going from Year 1 to the Killing Joke and then all the way to No Man's Land in less than a year. However, the main difference with No Man's Land is that this disaster was planned by the Riddler, turning the people of Gotham into his own slaves and forcing them to come up with riddles until someone can give him a riddle that he can't solve. The Riddler promises that when that happens, he will give up and let them all go, but for 6 months, nobody is able to give Riddler what he wants, and he just kills anyone who tries and fails. This was the Riddler's final goal all along. All that he wanted was to prove that he is the smartest man in Gotham, and it doesn't matter what he has to do in order to prove it, even if it means destroying Gotham and killing everyone. Thankfully, Batman was now back in action, and since the first Batsuit was destroyed, he now has to make himself a survival Batsuit, using whatever tools he can find and getting help from Gordon and Lucius Fox, who are the last resistance against the Riddler. Together, the three amigos come up with an elaborate plan to take down the Riddler, who is quite like a Roman emperor and sends Batman to fight literal lions. This was all part of an exciting plan full of suspense to track down Riddler's signal, a plan that ultimately failed because Riddler was already 5 steps ahead. After this epic failure, Batman takes it upon himself to find Riddler's hideout and take the Madman down. In this process, he finally realizes that everything he did at the start of his mission was all wrong. This is the moment where the story gives us character growth and development, as Bruce acknowledges that he was wrong for rejecting himself and the Wayne legacy, going as far as insulting Alfred in one of his lowest moments. He admits he was wrong about hating all the cops, to the point where he attacked Gordon with bats that he summoned using his bat sonar device, which is yet another reference to Year 1. Bruce finally realizes that he was stubborn and misguided, allowing us to see that Batman was flawed at the start of his journey, and with every new chapter, he tries to make himself better. This is how Batman grows into the best version of himself before facing the biggest villain Gotham has ever seen. This final chapter is the kind of epic finale that this storyline deserved, a battle of wits where Riddler brags about his intellectual superiority and Bruce shows him that no matter how smart he thinks he is, Batman will always be there to stop him. It's a phenomenal chapter with some of Greg Capullo's best work, illustrating the most interesting pages of this run, as Batman shows that his determination and resolve are more than enough to beat even the unbeatable. This is how Zero Year comes to an end and becomes the best storyline of this run. Granted, I am completely biased because I love the Batman history and I can't get enough of all the references, including Year 1, The Killing Joke, No Man's Land, and especially the first year of the Golden Age of Batman. Even at the very end of the story, there's one last Easter egg, as Bruce is reunited with Julie Madison, the original Batman girlfriend from 1939. In this new version, Julie is a gorgeous redhead who can change Bruce's life, allowing him to settle down, have a family, and even grow old. However, that was only Alfred creating imaginary stories once again, and as he apologizes to Julie for Bruce's rejection, the story ends by showing us that Batman is forever committed to Gotham City. Zero Year is almost perfect, and the only criticism I can think of is the continuity, as all of it happened only 6 years before the present time, which means that Batman had to go through all 4 Robins and 1 Batgirl in less than 5 years, and that's just nonsense. But besides that minor issue, I do think this is also the greatest Riddler story ever. Never before had the Riddler been such a terrifying villain, manipulating and destroying everyone in Gotham just to prove a point. Scott Snyder might actually be the best Riddler writer, but even though he had a gift for writing the Riddler, it's obvious that his favorite villain was the Joker, as the next epic saga was the ultimate Joker's story. Every storyline of this run up until now has followed the same pattern. It always starts slow, taking time to introduce the villains and developing their evil plans. This time, however, it's different, as we go right back to the present and from the very first chapter, all hell breaks loose as the Justice League attacks Batman. This is the start of Endgame, with Batman fighting the most iconic heroes of the DC universe, who have all been somehow mind-controlled by the Joker. Batman has no choice but to use a new bat armor that is bigger and specifically designed to fight the Justice League. This bat armor is called the Justice Buster, but as great and exciting as it is, it also comes out of nowhere, and once again it gets destroyed in less than 1 chapter, when a Jokerized Superman joins the fight. A big part of Gotham is once again destroyed in this epic fight, and it really starts to become excessive. The images of the total collapse and destruction of Gotham from Zero Year are still fresh in our minds, and this new wave of destruction feels like overkill and pointless. There are never any serious consequences to all this destruction. It's all there just for the spectacle. The same thing is true about the Justice League, as the story opens with all of these iconic heroes. But once they are all conveniently defeated by Batgod, they never show up in the story again at all, making it obvious that they were only used as props to generate hype about this new storyline. Things only get really interesting once the Joker shows up, confronting Batman directly and appearing with a completely normal face. This miraculous recovery is never fully explained until the final chapter of the story, where it's revealed that at the end of a death of the family, Joker fell down a cave into a pool of a mysterious chemical called Dionysium. This chemical is also behind the immortality of characters like Vandal Savage and Ra's al Ghul, and it was thanks to this chemical that the Joker's face was completely restored. Not only that, but the Dionysium also gave Joker a healing factor, allowing him to survive being shot at point blank and making him look as if he was some sort of supernatural monster. The Joker leaned hard on this new power and almost convinced everyone that he was actually immortal. It was definitely one of the scariest versions of Joker ever, as he not only tried to pass himself as an eldritch horror monster, but he also combined the Dionysium with Joker venom, infecting everyone in Gotham and turning them all into mindless, violent zombies that only increased the chaos and destruction of Gotham. And then, as part of his master plan, he goes to the Batcave, because he definitely knows the true identity of Batman, and when Alfred tries to stop him, Joker cuts off his hand, and then steals some of the trophies. The Joker then takes to the streets of Gotham, where he makes a dark parade with the trophies, surrounded by the hordes of Joker zombies as Gotham burns to the ground. The situation is so bad that Batman has to call everyone, not just the Bat family but also the Rogues Gallery, like the Penguin, Bane, Mr. Freeze and Poison Ivy. Batman even had to seek help from the Court of Owls. This is how we get to the final chapter, where everyone fights to stop the Joker. Everyone except the Justice League. See, this would have been the perfect moment to bring them back into the story and make it all come full circle, instead of using the Rogues Gallery as empty props once again. It was a huge missed opportunity, but at least we got a small cameo of Dick Grayson as Batman fighting the Joker. That was all part of the master plan to keep Joker distracted, while Batman recovered a sample of the Dionysium from the underground cave to develop a cure for all the Joker zombies. And although Batman manages to get the sample in time to his allies, Joker gets back to the cave just in time for the final showdown. This fight is amazing, and it's all thanks to Greg Capullo once again, clearly showing that he was a master when it came to final fights. This epic battle is the ultimate fight between Batman and Joker, and by the end of it all, both of them apparently kill each other as the cave collapses on top of them. That was a fight for the ages, and a proper finale for an awesome endgame. DC Comics even promoted this one as the Joker's story to end all Joker stories, and it definitely feels like a grand finale, with everyone getting involved, from the heroes, the friends and allies, and even the major villains. All of this is why Endgame truly feels like it would have been the perfect ending for this run, except for the fact that Batman was dead. Of course, this was all sorted out in the next saga, but there's one problem about that, and it's that every new storyline of this run has been bigger, more exciting and ambitious than the last one. The Court of Owls was big, but the death of the family was bigger, and Zero Year was even more. Now Endgame was the biggest of all, going all out and making everyone part of this great chapter. So the question becomes, what could they possibly do to top this one and create a grand finale worthy of this epic run? And the answer was, apparently, Robobat. The final chapter of this run kicks things off with Batman being dead and gone, and the GCPD goes into panic mode, so in their infinite wisdom, they decide they still needed a Batman, but this time it would be a fully deputized member of the law enforcement. And since no normal man could ever hope to be Batman, they spent literal millions of dollars developing mechanical suits for the new Batman, who is none other than James Gordon. And this right here is the exact moment when this run completely loses me. I could never get on board with Superheavy back when it was being published, and I still can't do it now, more than a decade later. If you like Superheavy, that's awesome. For me, however, this one goes beyond being shocking and epic, and it becomes downright absurd. I mean, look at the villains that this new Robobat has to fight. First there's a giant electric man, and then there's a giant man made of bricks. But the best has to be the main villain of this saga called Mr. Bloom, who is just a monstrous hippie that wants to bring down the elites of Gotham with the most destructive and dangerous version of flower power ever. When Robobat confronts Mr. Bloom, the flower creature becomes the biggest menace Gotham has ever seen, quite literally, as he becomes a giant flower monster. All of this is exactly like the Silver Age of Batman, but on a steroid. Because on top of having Gordon as Batman, Batman robots and giant monsters, we also get a Bat Megazord out of nowhere at the end of the story, which is then immediately forgotten about. Oh, and Gotham is once again completely destroyed, and at this point it's beyond frustrating and pointless, as by the end it only takes 2 pages for things to go back to normal. I actually think the only good thing about Superheavy was the introduction of the new Batsuit in the final chapter. However, everything that happened to Bruce to get to that point was honestly not worth it. The story not only reveals that Bruce was alive and well all along, but he was actually living a great life. Bruce had survived the fight with the Joker thanks to the Dionysium, which restored his body but also his mind, completely rewiring his brain and making him forget all about his past. Bruce's mind was now a blank canvas, and although Alfred started telling him about his past, Bruce stopped him right before learning about Batman. Bruce was no longer haunted by the memory of his dead parents, and he was no longer interested in whatever secret he was keeping. All he wanted now was to help in some other way, working at a center for young orphans alongside Julie Madison, who was now also his loving girlfriend. And I just can't stand any of that, because anyone with a functioning brain cell could see right from the start that this perfect picture for Bruce is never going to last, and it's just wasting everyone's time. All of this plays out as a cruel prank on Bruce, allowing him to have a taste of happiness, of love, of a life that, at the end of it all, was fake. And so the story becomes a waiting game, waiting for the inevitable moment when Bruce finally becomes Batman again. When that moment comes, it is both extremely convenient and tragic, as Bat-God had already created a machine that could restore his memory, but in order to do it, it kills the perfect lie that Bruce was living. Granted, the Batman comeback is great, and at the end of it all, it's like nothing ever happened, except for Julie Madison, who is the actual victim here. She's the only one that gains nothing out of all of this, and instead she only loses her partner and then is completely forgotten. That is how the final storyline of this run comes to an end, and after that there is only one final issue, where we get to see the most unusual thing ever. A quiet night in Gotham, with no crime and no emergencies. It's a chapter that makes a throwback to the first issue of this run, and it's quite a nice way to end one of the most admired runs in the Batman history. And I think the main reason it works is because of the iconic collaboration of Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo. Together they managed to develop a unique vision of Batman that was consistent all throughout the saga. This was the first time in many years that a Batman run had the same creative team without any significant changes or interruptions. That was quite rare in the 2000s, so when this run came around, it was a nice change of pace and a return to form to the Batman comics. This creative team had a very specific style that worked rather well for Batman. On the one hand, we have Scott Snyder, a writer who really enjoys exploring the criminal mind as well as all kinds of horror, which are both themes that work extremely well with Batman. Not only that, but Snyder is also not afraid of taking big risks, as he always goes all the way on his stories, with no restrictions whatsoever. Nothing is too big or too extreme, and every new storyline has to be bigger and more epic than the last one, which unfortunately works against him in the final storyline. This run is all about going big or going home, and although it works to some degree, I do miss the more grounded and slow-paced stories. I would have actually loved to get more gangsters, robbers, or simple murder mysteries instead of Superheavy, because by that point, the horror monsters that create apocalyptic levels of destruction started to get boring. I would have also loved a couple more chapters with the classic Batman villains like the Clayface story, because in this run all of them become simple background characters. Batman has many other cool villains, but this run makes it seem as if the Joker is the only worthy Batman enemy, giving him 2 epic storylines, 1 new origin story, and a significant cameo in the final chapter, appearing like this in 4 out of the 5 major storylines, which is definitely excessive. And lastly, I also don't really care for the extensive monologues and dialogue moments that are consistent all throughout this run. Sometimes it's good, but in this case it's just too much unnecessary exposition, as if the characters have to say every single thought they have. Now don't get me wrong, despite all of those issues I still think this run is very good, and it's mostly because of how easy it is to overlook all of these flaws, thanks to the fantastic work of Greg Capullo. I'm not exaggerating when I say that Greg is the best Batman artist we've got in the 21st century. That should tell you how much I enjoy his work in this run. I just can't get enough of Greg's Batman going underground, walking in the shadows of the sewers or ancient catacombs, looking for clues with a small flashlight and finding horrors that chill the bone. Or how about Batman gliding and swinging across the Gotham sky? It doesn't matter if it's day or night, Greg always makes it look phenomenal. Although I do have to say that a big part of why Greg's art works so well is thanks to the other people in the art team, the inkers and especially the colorist. FCO Plasencia has a unique coloring style, using flat and vibrant colors, combined with the right amount of shading and negative spaces, all of which complements and elevates Greg's work and turns these pages into actual masterpieces. I guess that my only criticism when it comes to the art of this run is that sometimes the facial expressions are not always there, as the characters sometimes have a blank face and their gaze is rather lost. But this always happens in the big monologue moment, so I guess the art is not really the problem after all. This might not be a perfect run, but after going back through all of it once again, I can confidently say it is the last great Batman run so far. Now that might not be entirely accurate, because this was also the final Batman run that I read. After the New 52, I did not consistently keep up with any more modern Batman comics, simply because none of the new stuff has captured my attention as this run did back in the day. So maybe I'm wrong and there is something better out there, but from what little things I've read here and there, none of the new Batman runs have managed to reach the greatness that was Snyder and Capullo's Batman. And on that note, I would like to apologize to both Scott and Greg, because back in the day, when they were both creating this run, I was a jackass who didn't know how to properly express criticism and made some stupid comments online, which is why to this day I'm still blocked by Scott on Twitter. So if by any chance you guys are watching this, I'm sorry. Because just like Bruce in Zero Year, I needed to grow up and realize just how wrong I was about everything. So thank you guys for an unforgettable Batman run, and thank you for watching this video. As always, a special thanks to Thomas Murray, Wall Scalar Batman, John Papp, Marco Daniel, Ace Mowick, MP, Richard Guyon, and all of my Patreons. Thank you all so much for your support, and I will see you in the next one.